I'm trying to put these ideas together to do with God and time. God and time. Obviously there's a kind of narrative, traditional fundamentalist narrative, I suppose, which places God at the beginning of time, like the creator, first cause, first mover thing. But that doesn't seem right to me. I mean, obviously it leads into all those infinite regresses about what came before God, but even without that, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Because you have to presume this huge, complex, omniscient thing, full of knowledge about something that doesn't exist, full of a kind of moral sense, even though there are no people around to enact any kind of morality or immorality. This big complex thing at the beginning of time that produces time and then inhabits it with objects and people doesn't make any sense at all to me. The other version, which just sounds sounds nonsense, I have to say, is this idea about God existing outside of space and time. That's very popular. Francis Collins mentions that. There's a lot of allusions, kind of poetic allusions in that direction made by theologians, that the categories of space and time don't apply to God because he, she or it is somehow outside of them. Again, that doesn't make any sense to me, because we have ideas of what's outside time. Time is a dimension, like 3 dimensions of space are dimensions. If you go outside of those dimensions, you go into another dimension. It's not terribly complex, really. It might be hard to fathom, but it doesn't. That doesn't really change anything. You're just kind of renaming God as some kind of extra dimensional being, which I don't think anybody would be happy with. So if you say God is outside in space and time, it's not an answer as far as I'm concerned, or else it's an answer which is trivial and science fiction. So the only place I think God could be, and this is probably Desjardins or something, I think, but the only place that anything like a God could be is at the end of time, because that's where the complex stuff could be. Certainly locally, at least around here on planet Earth, things have got more complex. The social constructions that we move around in all the time, these social groupings and these cities and these networks of information and all that kind of stuff is getting more complex. And I think there's a good argument to be made that it's actually getting more moral as well. I know Stephen Pinker did a great talk as part of the TED Talk series on history of violence, talking about how generally over the millennia, the centuries and even the decades, there's evidence to suggest that we are getting more moral in the sense that we are far less violent and far less tolerant of violence than we were. So I think there's an argument to be made that we are increasing in complexity, increasing in morality, perhaps increasing in tolerance, but certainly increasing in connectivity. We're becoming more joined to one another, so we're becoming more omnipresent in a sense, or we're kind of collectivizing more because of information networks and fast travel, that kind of thing. Now that obviously doesn't mean that we're becoming God, I don't think, but but there's no reason why we couldn't think of it that way if we wanted to. We are gifted or cursed with consciousness, which does seem to give us teleology. We are able to think in terms of final causes, which I presume animals can't, and certainly the rest of the inanimate world certainly can't. The inanimate world is just causal, in the sense of cause and effect. There's only causes which precede effects. But we can think, because we have consciousness, we can think in terms of final causes. We can set aspirational goals and move towards them and allow the kind of attractiveness and the light of that goal to pull us towards it. It's just a mental trick, but that's kind of what we're good at, really, I think. And if we chose to have an idea of what God might look like, and certainly none of the ones right now are good candidates, I don't think, but if we were able to think of what some kind of God would be, and then if we were able to kind of collectivize our efforts to move towards some kind of realization of a divine, omniscient, moral being, then I don't see any reason why we couldn't do that. if we wanted to. It couldn't be any of the gods right now, of course. It would have to be something much more kind of open source, I think, really. Something much more that evolved out of discourse and conflict occasionally, but yeah, some kind of open source God writing project I think would need.